The morning sun cast golden rays through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood before an ornate mirror in her private dressing room. Her reflection showed a woman transformed from the university student who had once caught Prince William's eye. Today marked a moment that would be remembered in royal history forever. Her lady-in-waiting, Sarah, carefully adjusted the sapphire tiara that had belonged to Princess Diana. The weight of the precious stones felt significant on Catherine's head, not just because of their monetary value, but because of the emotional legacy they carried. William had specifically requested that his wife wear his mother's jewelry for this coronation ceremony. "Your Royal Highness." "The car will arrive in 20 minutes, Sarah whispered, stepping back to admire the princess's appearance. Catherine wore a stunning navy blue dress designed by Alexander McQueen, the same designer who had created her wedding gown. The fabric shimmered subtly in the morning light, and the elegant cut emphasized her graceful silhouette. Catherine took a deep breath, placing her hand over her heart. She could feel it beating rapidly with anticipation and nervous energy. This wasn't just any royal event. This was King Charles III's coronation, and she and William would play crucial roles in the ceremony that would crown William's father as the new monarch of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms. Meanwhile, in another wing of the palace, Prince William stood in his study, looking out at the gardens where his children often played. He wore the full dress uniform of the Welsh Guards, complete with ceremonial sword and medals that told the story of his military service and royal duties. His aide-de-camp knocked gently on the door. "Sir, it's time to prepare for departure," the young officer announced. William nodded, straightening his uniform jacket one final time. He thought about his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, who had passed away just months earlier. She had worn the crown for 70 years, and now it was his father's turn to carry that immense responsibility. The prince picked up a small photograph from his desk. It showed him as a young boy with his parents and his brother Harry during happier times. So much had changed since then. Harry's absence from today's ceremony weighed heavily on William's mind, but he pushed those thoughts aside. Today was about unity, tradition, and moving the monarchy forward. As the royal couple prepared to leave Kensington Palace, crowds had already begun gathering along the processional route. People from all corners of the United Kingdom had traveled to London for this historic day. Many had camped overnight on the streets, wrapped in Union Jack flags and carrying homemade signs expressing their love for the royal family. Margaret Thompson, a 60-year-old teacher from Yorkshire, stood behind the barriers on the Mall with her teenage granddaughter Emma. "I was here for Queen Elizabeth's Silver Jubilee in 1977, Margaret told Emma excitedly. "I was pregnant with your mother then? Now I'm here with you for King Charles's coronation. It's like watching history repeat itself." Emma rolled her eyes good-naturedly at her grandmother's enthusiasm, but secretly felt moved by the significance of the moment. She held her phone ready to capture photos, knowing that years from now she would look back on this day as something extraordinary. She had witnessed firsthand that the security preparations for the coronation had been months in the planning. Scotland Yard officers positioned themselves at strategic points along the route, while plainclothes detectives mingled with the crowds. The Metropolitan Police had coordinated with intelligence services to ensure the safety of the thousands of dignitaries who would attend the ceremony inside Westminster Abbey. The final preparations were taking place. The ancient church, which had witnessed the coronation of monarchs for nearly 1,000 years, gleamed with fresh flowers and ceremonial decorations. The coronation chair, containing the Stone of Scone, sat ready in the sanctuary. This wooden throne had been used for the coronation of English and British monarchs since 1308, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Justin Welby reviewed his notes one final time. He would be the one to place the St. Edward's crown on King Charles's head, continuing a tradition that stretched back through centuries of British history. The weight of this responsibility was not lost on him as he prepared for the most significant ceremony he would ever perform. Television crews from around the world had set up their equipment days in advance. The BBC's coverage would reach an estimated global audience of 2 billion people. Commentators prepared their scripts, ready to explain the symbolism and significance of each moment in the elaborate ceremony to viewers who might be watching their first royal coronation. Back at Kensington Palace, Catherine and William's children were being prepared by their nanny. Prince George, as second in line to the throne, would have a special role in the ceremony. Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, though younger, would also attend, making this a true family affair. The children had been practicing their ceremonial roles for weeks, understanding the importance of representing their family with dignity and grace. The convoy of royal cars departed Kensington Palace precisely at the scheduled time. Catherine and William sat together in the state limousine, their children facing them in the luxurious vehicle. The car moved slowly through the streets of London, allowing the crowds to see the royal family clearly through the specially designed windows. As they traveled along the familiar route toward Westminster Abbey, Catherine watched the faces of the people lining the streets. She saw elderly women wiping tears from their eyes, young children waving frantically from their parents' shoulders, and teenagers holding up their phones to capture every moment. The genuine affection and excitement of the crowds never ceased to amaze her. Prince George sat quietly beside his mother, occasionally asking whispered questions about the ceremony. Despite his young age, he understood the significance of the day. His great-grandmother had always told him stories about the importance of service and duty to the nation. Today, he would see his grandfather officially accept that sacred responsibility. Princess Charlotte pressed her face against the window, delighted by the colorful decorations and the sea of Union Jack flags. She pointed excitedly at a group of schoolchildren who were singing "God Save the King" as the royal car passed by. Prince Louis, the youngest of the three, dozed peacefully in his formal outfit. Seemingly unaffected by the historic nature of the journey, William took his wife's hand as they approached Westminster Abbey. Through the car windows, they could see the magnificent Gothic architecture of the ancient church, where they had been married 12 years earlier. The same bells that had rung for their wedding now pealed in celebration of his father's coronation. The abbey was filled with representatives from around the world. Foreign royalty, heads of state, and dignitaries from the Commonwealth nations had traveled to London for this momentous occasion. The guest list read like a who's who of global leadership, each person understanding the historical significance of witnessing the crowning of a new British monarch. As the royal limousine pulled up to the Abbey's west entrance, Catherine felt a moment of profound emotion. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this point, from her middle-class upbringing in Berkshire to becoming a future queen consort. The responsibility felt both overwhelming and inspiring. The Abbey doors opened, and the royal family stepped out into the crisp London air. The sound of the crowds was momentarily overwhelming, a roar of cheers and applause that seemed to echo off the ancient stone walls. Camera flashes created a constant sparkle of light as photographers captured every step of their entrance inside the Abbey. King Charles III waited in a private chamber, preparing for the moment when he would take the oath that would define the rest of his reign. He wore the crimson velvet robe of state, trimmed with ermine and gold lace. The weight of the garment reminded him of the weight of responsibility he was about to formally accept. The king's thoughts turned to his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, who had carried this burden with such grace for 7 decades. He remembered watching her own coronation as a 4-year-old boy, not fully understanding the significance of what he was witnessing. Now, at 74 years old, it was his turn to make the same solemn promises to serve his people. Queen Camilla, soon to be crowned queen consort, sat in her own preparation room, attended by her ladies-in-waiting. She wore a Bruce Oldfield dress in royal blue, chosen to complement her husband's ceremonial robes. The queen consort's crown, specially made for this ceremony, waited nearby, its diamonds and precious stones catching the light from the stained glass windows. The congregation within Westminster Abbey represented the diversity and scope of the modern Commonwealth. Prime ministers from Canada, Australia, and New Zealand sat alongside African presidents and Caribbean governors-general. The ceremony would not only crown a new king but also reaffirm the bonds that connected nations. across 6 continents. As the processional music began, indicating the start of the formal ceremony, Catherine and William took their designated places. The Princess of Wales wore the diamond diadem, the same tiara that Queen Elizabeth II had worn to her own coronation 70 years earlier. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present. The ancient words of the coronation service began to fill the abbey, spoken in the same format that had been used for centuries. The Archbishop of Canterbury's voice carried clearly through the sacred space, each phrase weighted with historical significance and religious solemnity. The ceremony that was about to unfold would follow traditions that stretched back over a millennium. Television commentators around the world began their coverage, explaining to their audiences the meaning behind each element of the coronation ritual. Millions of people paused their daily routines to watch this rare and magnificent ceremony, understanding that they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered and discussed for generations to come. The moment had arrived for King Charles III to make his entrance into Westminster Abbey as sovereign-elect. The great procession began, with the king walking slowly down the nave of the abbey, accompanied by the magnificent sound of the coronation anthem. Every step he took brought him closer to the moment when he would be transformed from heir to reigning monarch, completing a journey that had begun the moment his mother drew her final breath. The moment King Charles III appeared at the west door of Westminster Abbey, the entire congregation rose to their feet in unison. The sight was breathtaking as hundreds of guests, dressed in their finest ceremonial attire, stood to honor the man who would soon become their anointed sovereign. The king moved with measured dignity down the aisle, each step bringing him closer to his destiny. Catherine felt tears forming in her eyes as she watched her father-in-law approach the altar. She had known Charles for over 2 decades, first as her boyfriend's father, then as her father-in-law, and now she was witnessing his transformation into king. The emotion of the moment was almost overwhelming, and she squeezed William's hand tightly as they stood together. Young Prince George watched with wide eyes as his grandfather passed by their seats. The boy had been carefully coached on royal protocol, but nothing could have prepared him for the majesty and solemnity of this moment. He stood perfectly straight, his small hands clasped in front of him, understanding instinctively that he was witnessing something extraordinary. The Archbishop of Canterbury greeted King Charles at the altar with words that had been spoken at coronations for centuries. "Sir, is your Majesty willing to take the oath?" he asked, his voice carrying clearly throughout the ancient abbey. The king's response was firm and clear: "I am willing," marking the formal beginning of his reign. As the king knelt before the altar to take his coronation oath, promising to govern the peoples of his realms according to their respective laws and customs, Catherine reflected on the magnitude of the promises being made. These were not just ceremonial words, but sacred vows that would guide Charles's reign for the rest of his life. The most sacred part of the coronation ceremony was about to begin, the anointing. King Charles removed his crimson robe and sat in the coronation chair, the same throne that had been used for the crowning of monarchs since the 14th century. A golden canopy was held over him to shield this most holy moment from public view. The archbishop poured holy oil from the ampulla into the coronation spoon, both precious artifacts that had been used in coronation ceremonies for centuries. As he anointed the king's hands, breast, and head with the sacred oil, he spoke ancient words of blessing and consecration. This moment transformed Charles from a man into a divinely appointed monarch. William watched his father with profound respect and emotion. He knew that one day he too would sit in that same chair and receive the same anointing. The weight of that future responsibility felt both distant and immediate as he witnessed the ceremony that would one day be performed for him. After the anointing, the king was dressed in the golden supertunica and the imperial manteau, garments that symbolized his new status as sovereign. Each item of regalia was presented to him with specific prayers and blessings. The sovereign's orb was placed in his right hand, representing his role as defender of the faith and temporal ruler under God. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. The archbishop lifted St. Edward's crown, the solid gold crown set with precious stones that had been used for coronations since 1661. The abbey fell completely silent as he held it aloft, and Catherine held her breath, knowing she was about to witness history. "God save the king," the archbishop proclaimed as he placed the crown on Charles's head. At that exact moment, the abbey erupted in the traditional response from the congregation. "God save the king." The words echoed off the ancient walls as peers and peeresses placed their own coronets on their heads in a synchronized gesture of loyalty and recognition outside Westminster Abbey. The sound of church bells rang out across London, signaling to the nation and the world that they had a new crowned king. Gun salutes boomed from the Tower of London and other ceremonial locations throughout the capital. The crowds lining the streets cheered and waved their flags with renewed enthusiasm. Queen Camilla's own coronation followed immediately after her husband's. She walked forward with dignity and grace, ready to receive her own crown and take her place as queen consort. The smaller, specially created crown was placed on her head as she knelt beside her husband, and Catherine felt moved by the obvious love and support between the royal couple. As the newly crowned king and queen took their places on the thrones for the homage ceremony, William stepped forward to perform the first act of allegiance. As the heir to the throne, he had the honor of being the first to pledge his loyalty to the new monarch. He knelt before his father and spoke the ancient words of fealty with clear emotion in his voice. "I, William, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb and of earthly worship, and faith and truth I will bear unto you to live and die against all manner of folks," William declared, his voice carrying throughout the abbey. When he finished speaking, he leaned forward to kiss his father's cheek. A moment of personal affection within the formal ceremony, Catherine watched her husband perform this solemn duty with pride and love. She knew how much this moment meant to William, finally seeing his father achieve the role he had been preparing for his entire life. The Prince of Wales returned to his place beside his wife, his eyes bright with unshed tears of joy and pride. The coronation service concluded with the singing of the national anthem, now officially "God Save the King" rather than "God Save the Queen" for the first time in over 70 years. Every voice in the abbey joined together in this ancient prayer for the monarch's well-being and successful reign. The sound was magnificent, filling every corner of the sacred space with harmony and hope. As the coronation ceremony concluded within Westminster Abbey, the newly crowned King Charles III and Queen Camilla prepared for their triumphant return journey to Buckingham Palace. The ancient ritual was complete, but the celebration was just beginning. The royal family gathered at the abbey's entrance, ready to greet the thousands of well-wishers who had waited patiently throughout the morning. Catherine adjusted Prince Louis's formal attire one final time before they stepped outside. The youngest Wales child had been remarkably well behaved during the lengthy ceremony, though she could see he was growing tired from the excitement and pageantry. Princess Charlotte held her mother's hand tightly, still in awe of what she had just witnessed. The moment the royal family emerged from Westminster Abbey, the roar from the crowds was deafening. People who had been waiting for hours erupted in cheers, applause, and singing. Union Jack flags waved frantically above the sea of heads, creating a colorful canopy of patriotic celebration that stretched as far as the eye could see. King Charles III and Queen Camilla entered the Gold State coach, the magnificent ceremonial carriage that had been used for coronations since 1821. The ornate vehicle, weighing 4 tons and requiring 8 horses to pull it, represented the grandeur and tradition of the British monarchy. As the coach began its stately progress toward Buckingham Palace, onlookers pressed forward to catch a glimpse of their newly crowned sovereigns. William and Catherine followed in their own state carriage with their children, waving continuously to the enthusiastic crowds. The Princess of Wales had perfected her royal wave over the years, a graceful gesture that managed to acknowledge thousands of people simultaneously. She was deeply moved by the genuine affection and joy she saw on the faces lining the route. The processional route had been carefully planned to maximize the number of people who could see the royal family. The journey took them through some of London's most historic areas, past landmarks that had witnessed centuries of royal celebrations. Each section of the route was packed with spectators, many of whom had traveled from distant parts of the United Kingdom and beyond. Prince George sat perfectly upright in the carriage, occasionally waving shyly when his parents encouraged him. The young prince was beginning to understand his place in this grand pageantry, though the full weight of his future role remained beyond his childhood comprehension. His presence in the coronation carriage symbolized the continuity of the monarchy into the next generation along the Mall, the broad ceremonial avenue leading to Buckingham Palace. The crowds were 10 people deep behind the safety barriers. Mary Johnson, a retired nurse from Scotland, had driven down to London specifically for the coronation. She wiped tears from her eyes as the royal carriages passed by, remembering how she had watched Queen Elizabeth II's coronation on a tiny black and white television as a young girl. The Metropolitan Police had organized one of their largest security operations ever for the coronation celebrations. Officers lined the entire route, their presence both protective and ceremonial. Many of them had trained for months for this specific event, understanding that they were playing a crucial role in a historic day that would be remembered for generations. Television cameras positioned at strategic points along the route captured every moment of the royal procession. The BBC's lead commentator provided running narration for viewers around the world, explaining the significance of each location and the history behind the ceremonial traditions they were witnessing. As the Gold State coach approached Buckingham Palace, the anticipation reached fever pitch. The palace forecourt was packed with invited guests, dignitaries, and members of the press. The famous balcony, where the royal family would soon appear, stood empty but ready for the climactic moment of the day's celebrations. Inside the palace, staff members had been preparing for weeks for this moment. The state dining room had been set for the coronation banquet, with priceless china and crystal arranged on tables that could accommodate hundreds of guests. Every detail had been planned and rehearsed to ensure the day proceeded flawlessly. The newly crowned king and queen alighted from their carriage at the palace entrance, still wearing their crowns and ceremonial robes. Palace guards stood at attention as they passed, their bearskin hats and red tunics adding to the pageantry of the occasion. The sight of the monarchs in their full regalia was magnificent and moving. Catherine felt a surge of pride as she watched Charles and Camilla enter Buckingham Palace as king and queen for the first time. She knew how long Charles had waited for this moment and how seriously he took the responsibility that came with the crown. His dedication to duty and service had been evident throughout his decades as heir to the throne. The royal family gathered in the palace's center room, the traditional staging area before balcony appearances. Palace staff helped arrange the king and queen's ceremonial robes and ensured that everyone was properly positioned for their public appearance. The children were given final instructions about where to stand and how to wave outside. The crowd in front of Buckingham Palace had grown to an estimated 100,000 people. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation as everyone waited for the moment when the newly crowned king would appear on the famous balcony. Street vendors moved through the crowd selling commemorative flags, buttons, and programs, while families shared picnic lunches on the palace grounds. The band of the Welsh guards took their position in the palace forecourt, their instruments gleaming in the afternoon sun. They would provide musical accompaniment for the balcony appearance, playing the national anthem and other ceremonial pieces that would mark the climax of the coronation celebrations. As the appointed time approached, palace officials made final preparations for the balcony appearance. The red velvet draping was checked one last time, and security personnel took their positions. The moment that millions of people around the world were waiting for was about to begin, the traditional culmination of a British coronation that would seal this historic day in the memory of all who witnessed it. The moment had finally arrived. Palace officials opened the glass doors leading to the famous Buckingham Palace balcony, and a hush fell over the massive crowd gathered below. King Charles III appeared first, still wearing St. Edward's crown, followed immediately by Queen Camilla in her gleaming queen consort's crown. The sight of the newly crowned monarchs stepping onto the balcony sent waves of excitement through the thousands of spectators. William and Catherine followed closely behind, with their 3 children positioned carefully between them. The Prince and Princess of Wales had practiced this moment with their children, explaining the importance of acknowledging the crowd and representing their family with dignity. Princess Charlotte held her mother's hand, while Prince George stood proudly next to his father. The roar from the crowd was unlike anything Catherine had ever experienced, even after years of royal appearances. The sound seemed to rise from the very ground itself, a collective expression of joy, loyalty, and celebration that enveloped the royal family on the balcony. She felt goosebumps rise on her arms as she took in the sea of faces below. King Charles stepped forward to the balcony rail and raised his hand in acknowledgement of his people. The gesture was simple but profound, representing the new monarch's acceptance of the love and loyalty being offered to him. Queen Camilla stood beside her husband, her face radiant with happiness and the realization that their long journey to this moment was finally complete. Below in the crowd, emotions ran high among the spectators. Thomas Mitchell, a veteran who had served in the Royal Navy for 30 years, stood at attention and saluted his new king. Tears streamed down his weathered face as he thought of all the service members who had sworn allegiance to the crown throughout British history. Young Prince Louis, perhaps overwhelmed by the noise and excitement, began to wave enthusiastically at the crowd, his small hand moving back and forth with innocent joy. His uninhibited display of happiness delighted the spectators and photographers, providing one of the most charming moments of the entire day. The family spent several minutes on the balcony, taking time to acknowledge different sections of the crowd. Catherine noticed how many people were holding up photographs of Queen Elizabeth II, honoring the beloved monarch who had recently passed away. The gesture moved her deeply, representing the continuity between past and future that the monarchy embodied. Princess Charlotte pointed excitedly at the colorful array of flags and banners being waved below. The young princess had been carefully prepared for this moment, and she waved gracefully at the crowd, already showing signs of the poise and composure that would serve her well in her future royal duties. The traditional Royal Air Force flypast was announced by the distant sound of approaching aircraft. The crowd's attention turned skyward as the Red Arrow's aerobatic team approached, their red, white, and blue smoke trails creating a magnificent display across the London sky. The sight was breathtaking, adding a dramatic flourish to an already spectacular day. King Charles looked up at the aircraft formation with visible emotion, remembering his own military service and the many ceremonial occasions he had attended as Prince of Wales. Now, as king, he was the focus of this grand tribute, a responsibility that felt both humbling and inspiring. As the aircraft passed overhead, the crowd sang, "God Save the King," spontaneously, their voices joining together in a powerful chorus that echoed off the palace walls. Catherine felt tears in her eyes as she listened to thousands of people expressing their loyalty and affection for the royal family through song. The balcony appearance traditionally lasted about 10 minutes, but today seemed to stretch longer as the newly crowned king and queen took in the magnitude of the celebration. They waved continuously, acknowledging the different sections of the crowd and ensuring that as many people as possible felt personally recognized. Inside the palace, staff members watched the balcony appearance on television, many of them wiping away tears of their own. They had worked tirelessly for months to ensure this day proceeded perfectly, and seeing the joy on the faces of the royal family and the public made all their efforts worthwhile. Then the moment came when the royal family knew they needed to step back inside, but the crowd below wasn't ready to let them go. Chants of "We want the king" and "Long live the king" continued to ring out from the forecourt, demonstrating the genuine affection and support for the new monarch. Before leaving the balcony, King Charles took one final look at the crowd below, raising both hands in a gesture of gratitude and blessing. The image would be captured by photographers and remembered as one of the defining moments of his coronation day, representing the bond between sovereign and subject that forms the heart of constitutional monarchy. Queen Camilla joined her husband for this final acknowledgement, and together they created a picture of unity and purpose that would appear on front pages around the world. Their journey from a controversial couple to beloved king and queen had taken decades, and this moment represented the ultimate validation of their love and commitment. As the royal family finally stepped back inside Buckingham Palace, the crowd began to slowly disperse, though many lingered in the area, reluctant to let this historic day end. Families gathered their picnic supplies and folded their flags. But the conversations continued about what they had witnessed and the memories they had created. The balcony doors closed, but the image of the newly crowned king and queen, surrounded by their family and acknowledging their people, would remain etched in the memory of everyone who witnessed it. The coronation of King Charles III was complete, and a new chapter in British royal history had officially begun. As evening approached, Buckingham Palace transformed from a ceremonial venue into an intimate family home. King Charles III had finally removed St. Edward's crown and changed from his ceremonial robes into more comfortable evening attire. Though he still wore the medals and decorations befitting his new status as sovereign, Catherine found herself in the palace's blue drawing room, helping her children process the extraordinary day they had experienced. Prince George sat quietly on an ornate sofa, still somewhat overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had witnessed. Princess Charlotte chattered excitedly about the crowds and the beautiful dresses, while Prince Louis had fallen asleep in his mother's arms. Exhausted from the day's events, William joined his family in the drawing room, having just concluded a private conversation with his father about the day's proceedings and the responsibilities that lay ahead. The new king had expressed his gratitude for William's support and his pride in how beautifully Catherine and the children had represented the family throughout the coronation. The palace staff moved quietly through the corridors, beginning the process of returning the building to its normal state while preserving mementos from this historic day. The coronation regalia would be carefully cleaned and returned to the Tower of London, where it would be displayed for future generations to admire and study. Queen Camilla sat in her private study, writing thank you notes to key organizers and participants in the coronation ceremony. Despite her exhaustion, she felt compelled to personally acknowledge the countless individuals who had worked to make the day perfect. Her new crown sat on its stand nearby, catching the light from the table lamp. Television coverage of the coronation continued throughout the evening, with commentators analyzing every aspect of the ceremony and the day's events. Viewing figures indicated that over 2 billion people worldwide had watched at least part of the coronation, making it one of the most watched events in television history. The emotional impact of the day was evident in the messages pouring into Buckingham Palace from around the world. World leaders, ordinary citizens, and organizations sent congratulations and expressions of support for the new king and queen. The palace's correspondence office would be working for weeks to respond to all the, wishes. In the palace kitchens, the staff prepared a private family dinner for the royal family. After the grandeur and formality of the day's official events, this intimate meal would provide an opportunity for the family to reflect on the historic significance of what they had accomplished together. Catherine thought about her own journey to this moment. From a middle-class girl from Berkshire to a future queen consort who had just witnessed her father-in-law's coronation, the weight of her own future responsibilities felt both daunting and inspiring as she considered the path that lay ahead for her. And William. The children's nanny arrived to prepare them for bed, though they were still buzzing with excitement from the day's adventures. Prince George asked countless questions about what would happen next and when he might see his grandfather wearing the crown again. His innocent curiosity highlighted the generational nature of royal responsibility. Outside the palace, London was still celebrating. Pubs throughout the city were filled with revelers toasting the new king, and street parties continued in neighborhoods across the capital. The coronation had brought people together in a way that felt reminiscent of the great royal celebrations of the past. News Reports from around the Commonwealth showed similar celebrations taking place from Canada to Australia, from Jamaica to New Zealand. The coronation had reinforced the bonds that connected these diverse nations under the British Crown, demonstrating the enduring appeal of the monarchy as a symbol of unity and continuity. As the family gathered for their private dinner, King Charles III offered a toast to his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, acknowledging that this day would not have been possible without her decades of devoted service and the example she had set for them all. The moment was deeply emotional, combining joy for the present with gratitude for the past. The conversation around the dinner table was relaxed and personal, a stark contrast to the formal ceremonies of earlier in the day. The king spoke about his hopes and aspirations for his reign, while Catherine and William shared their observations about the public's response to the coronation. After dinner, the family gathered in the palace's private sitting room to watch highlights of the day's events on television. Seeing themselves from the perspective of the cameras and commentators provided a different viewpoint on the historic ceremony they had just lived through. Prince Louis had awakened from his nap and was fascinated by seeing himself on television, pointing excitedly at the screen whenever he appeared. His innocence and joy provided moments of lightness in what had been an intensely emotional and significant day for the entire family. As the evening drew to a close, Catherine reflected on the messages she had received from friends and family around the world. People who had known her since university, former colleagues, and distant relatives had all reached out to share in this historic moment and express their pride in her role. The coronation of King Charles III was officially complete, but its impact would resonate for years to come. As the royal family prepared to retire for the evening, they knew that tomorrow would bring new responsibilities and challenges. But tonight, they could simply be a family that had successfully navigated one of the most important days in British royal history. The palace fell quiet as the lights dimmed, but the significance of what had occurred within its walls would be remembered and celebrated for generations. King Charles III and Queen Camilla's reign had officially begun, supported by a family united in their commitment to service, duty, and the continuing story of the British monarchy.